Imagine a Hollywood icon. A man whose smile could light up the silver screen and whose charm could unravel the hearts of the biggest stars. Now imagine that same man leaving a trail of broken promises, shattered lives, and secrets buried for decades. What if the price of his stardom was paid not just by him, but by the women who loved him? In her memoir, Joan Collins dropped a bombshell: a pregnancy with Warren Beatty, terminated in silence to save her career. It's a revelation that forces us to ask, was Warren Beatty Hollywood's ultimate romantic hero, or a manipulator who thrived on control? Welcome to Unraveled, where we peel back the glitz to expose the truths hiding in the shadows. If you're ready to question everything you thought you knew about Hollywood's golden age, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and drop a comment. Does a man's talent ever excuse the pain he causes? Let's dive in. Warren Beatty wasn't just a movie star. He was a phenomenon. From Bonnie and Clyde to Reds, he didn't just act, he produced, directed, and shaped cinema history. But behind the awards and accolades was a man whose personal life was a whirlwind of passion and betrayal. Born in 1937 in Virginia, far from the neon glow of Los Angeles, Beatty grew up in the shadow of his sister, Shirley MacLaine, a Broadway and Hollywood darling. While she dazzled on stage, he was a quiet bookworm, later a high school football star, dreaming of a life beyond the ordinary. By his early 20s, he was in New York, training under the legendary Stella Adler, determined to carve his own path. But it wasn't just ambition driving him. Beatty had a hunger for something else: connection, conquest, maybe even control. His reputation as Hollywood's greatest playboy didn't come by accident. It was built on a string of romances that read like a who's who of Tinseltown: Joan Collins, Natalie Wood, Julie Christie, Madonna, and countless others. Each relationship, though, seemed to come with a cost. Not for him, but for the women who fell under his spell. Take Joan Collins, the glamorous British actress who met Beatty in 1960. She was 27, a rising star. He was 23, a nobody with a Tony nomination and a screen test. Their romance was electric, but Collins later admitted she could barely keep up with his relentless energy in private. She wasn't naive, but Beatty's intensity was overwhelming. When rumors surfaced of his affair with Splendor in the Grass co-star Natalie Wood, Collins confronted him. His response: a proposal, a ring, and promises of forever. She believed him until the tabloids screamed louder, and she found herself alone, facing a choice that would haunt her. Decades later, she revealed she'd been pregnant with Beatty's child and chose to end it, fearing a scandal that could destroy her career. It's a decision that speaks volumes about the era's brutal pressures on women, and about the man who left her to face it alone. But Collins was just the beginning. Beatty's charm wasn't just romantic. It was strategic. In 1960, with the Vietnam War looming, he joined the California Air National Guard, only to be dishonorably discharged a year later, a move that conveniently made him ineligible for the draft. Was it a calculated dodge, or a young man's fear? Either way, it freed him to chase Hollywood without interruption. By 1961, he landed his first major role opposite Natalie Wood in Splendor in the Grass, a film that demanded raw, romantic chemistry. Director Elia Kazan pushed them to their limits. And soon, their on-screen passion spilled off-screen. Wood, a former child star desperate to prove herself, was married to Robert Wagner. Beatty was still engaged to Collins. Neither relationship survived the fallout. Wood's marriage collapsed, and Collins, betrayed, walked away. But the affair with Wood wasn't just a scandal, it was a turning point. One that would leave her broken and Beatty unscathed. This is where the story gets murky. Beatty hated the spotlight on his personal life, yet he courted it with every affair, every headline. He was a paradox, a private man who lived publicly, a romantic who left devastation in his wake. As we unravel his story, we'll explore not just the glamour of his rise, but the shadows he cast in Joan Collins, on Natalie Wood, and on a 17-year-old Carrie Fisher, who faced his advances and said no. We'll ask the tough questions. Was Beatty a product of a permissive Hollywood, where men like him thrived unchecked? Or was he something more, a man who wielded his charm like a weapon? Stay with us as we follow the timeline of his life, dissect the players in his orbit, and confront the contradictions that define him. This is Warren Beatty's story, and it's far darker than the tabloids ever told. Warren Beatty's journey to Hollywood stardom wasn't a straight line. It was a winding path paved with ambition, scandal, and a knack for being in the right place at the right time. To understand the man behind the myth, we need to trace his steps. From a small-town kid with big dreams to a cinematic titan whose personal life kept the tabloids in business. But as we follow this timeline, keep this question in mind. Did Beatty's relentless drive for success come at the expense of those who loved him? Let's rewind to the beginning and see how the pieces of his story fit together. Born in 1937 in Richmond, Virginia, Henry Warren Beatty later dropped the E, grew up in a modest household. His parents were teachers. His mother a drama enthusiast who nurtured her children's creative sparks. His older sister, Shirley MacLaine, was the family's early star, captivating audiences on Broadway while Warren was still a shy, introspective teen. He wasn't the performer she was. Not yet. In high school, he traded books for a football jersey, his athletic build hinting at the charisma that would later define him. But Virginia felt small, suffocating. Like Shirley, he wanted out, and Hollywood was the destination. In the mid-1950s, he enrolled at Northwestern University, hoping the drama program would be his ticket. It wasn't. Restless and dissatisfied, he dropped out after a year, ignoring his parents' pleas. They knew their son trying to stop him would only make him push harder. By 1957, Beatty was in New York, studying under Stella Adler, the acting coach who'd shaped Marlon Brando. Adler saw potential in the 20-year-old, teaching him to channel his intensity into performance. He started small but parts in TV shows, minor roles in plays, but his focus was razor-sharp. In 1959, at just 22, he landed a supporting role in a Broadway play that changed everything. His performance earned a Tony nomination, a rare feat for a newcomer. And suddenly Hollywood came calling. A screen test followed, and by 1960, Beatty was in Los Angeles, a fresh-faced contender in a town full of sharks. But he wasn't naive. The Vietnam War was escalating, and the draft loomed over young men like him. Beatty had no intention of serving. In February 1960, he joined the California Air National Guard, a curious move for an aspiring star. A year later, he was dishonorably discharged, a status that conveniently barred him from military service. Coincidence or calculation? The move cleared his path to focus on acting, and he seized the opportunity. That same year, 1960, Beatty's personal life took center stage. At a string of Hollywood parties, he spotted Joan Collins, the sultry British actress 4 years his senior. She was established. He was a nobody with potential. Their chemistry was instant, their romance a wildfire. Collins later described him as insatiable, a man whose energy in private left her reeling. But their passion was tested early. In 1961, Beatty landed his breakout role in Splendor in the Grass, opposite Natalie Wood. a former child star desperate to reinvent herself. Director Elia Kazan demanded authenticity, pushing Beatty and Wood into intimate scenes that blurred the line between acting and reality. Gossip columns buzzed with rumors of an affair, and they weren't wrong. Beatty was still with Collins, Wood married to Robert Wagner. The fallout was swift. Collins, hearing the whispers, flew back from Europe to confront him. He proposed, slipping a ring on her finger, but it was a hollow gesture. By late 1961, both relationships were over. Collins walked away, and Wood's marriage crumbled. Beatty, meanwhile, moved into Wood's rented Bel Air mansion, their affair now an open secret. The early 1960s were a whirlwind for Beatty, both on and off the screen. Splendor in the Grass hit theaters in 1961, a critical and commercial success that made him a star at 24. But his personal life was messy. While still entangled with Wood, he was linked to Susan Strasberg and even Vivien Leigh, the screen legend over 20 years his senior. During a 1962 project, the tabloids loved it, painting him as Hollywood's new heartthrob. Yet Beatty chafed at the attention, hating interviews and dodging questions about his past. In 1962, he had a poignant encounter with Marilyn Monroe at a producer's party, the night before her death. He described it as soulful moonlit walk, him playing piano for her, but the timing raises questions. Was it a genuine connection, or another story he polished for effect? By 1963, his relationship with Wood was unraveling. One night, he vanished for a week, no explanation given. When he returned, Wood had had enough and ended it. She was left picking up the pieces. He moved on. The mid-1960s brought a career slump. Films like The Roman Spring of Mrs. Stone flopped, but Beatty's ambition didn't waver. He began dating Julie Christie, a fiercely independent actress. In 1966, their relationship was unconventional, often open, a dynamic that suited Beatty's wandering eye. In 1967, he took a gamble that redefined his career, producing and starring in Bonnie and Clyde. The film was a gritty, violent departure from Hollywood norms, but Beatty's persistence paid off. He convinced studio head Jack Warner to back it, even humbling himself in dramatic fashion to seal the deal. The film's success cemented his status as a visionary, not just an actor. Yet his personal life remained turbulent. By the late 1960s, his romance with Christie was fraying, though they'd reunite professionally for 1975 Shampoo. As Beatty's star rose, so did the body count of his romantic casualties. Each affair, each broken promise, added to the legend and the questions. Was he a romantic idealist, or a man who thrived on chaos? As we move forward, we'll meet the women who shaped his story, and the industry giants who enabled his rise, all while asking, what drove Warren Beatty, and who paid the price? Warren Beatty's story isn't just about one man's rise to fame. It's a tapestry woven with the lives of those who crossed his path, lovers, colleagues, and industry titans who shaped his journey and bore the weight of his ambition. To unravel the enigma of Beatty, we need to meet the key players in his orbit. From the women who fell for his charm to the Hollywood power brokers who bet on his talent. Each relationship, whether romantic or professional, reveals a piece of the puzzle, a man whose charisma could open doors and break hearts in equal measure. But as we explore these connections, let's ask, did Beatty's influence uplift those around him? Or did it cast them into his shadow? Let's meet the cast of characters who defined his world. First, there's Joan Collins, the glamorous British actress who became Beatty's first high-profile love in 1960. At 27, Collins was a seasoned star, known for her beauty and poise. Beatty, for years younger, was a hungry newcomer with a Tony nomination and a spark in his eye. Their romance was passionate, almost cinematic. But beneath the surface, it was fraught. Collins later wrote in her memoir that Beatty's relentless energy overwhelmed her, particularly in private. She was no stranger to Hollywood's intensity, but Beatty was different, demanding, insatiable. When rumors of his affair with Natalie Wood surfaced in 1961, Collins confronted him, only to receive a proposal that felt more like a distraction than a commitment. The betrayal stung, but the deeper wound came later. Decades after their breakup, Collins revealed a secret she'd carried for years. She'd been pregnant with Beatty's child and chose to terminate it, fearing a scandal that could derail her career. The decision was hers, but the context, Beatty's infidelity, the era's unforgiving spotlight on women, points to a power imbalance. Collins walked away, rebuilding her life. But her story raises questions about the personal toll of loving a man like Beatty. Next, Natalie Wood, whose entanglement with Beatty left scars that never fully healed. In 1961, Wood was 23, a former child star desperate to prove herself as an adult actress. Cast opposite Beatty in Splendor in the Grass, she brought vulnerability to their scenes, amplified by director Elia Kazan's grueling demands for authenticity. Off-screen, their chemistry ignited an affair that shattered her marriage to Robert Wagner and ended Beatty's engagement to Collins. Wood was no innocent. She navigated Hollywood's pressures since childhood, but she was fragile, battling anxiety over her career. Beatty, at 24, was a rising star, unburdened by the same doubts. Their relationship, played out in the tabloids, was a public spectacle, but privately, it was turbulent. By 1963, after Beatty vanished for a week without explanation, Wood ended it, moving on to a rented Bel Air mansion and a press tour that magnified her pain. Years later, in 1967, when Beatty approached her to star in Bonnie and Clyde, she refused, breaking down in tears. That night, she attempted suicide, a chilling testament to the emotional wreckage he left behind. Wood's story isn't just about a failed romance. It's about a woman caught in the orbit of a man whose charm could destabilize lives. Then there's Annette Bening, the woman who seemingly tamed Hollywood's greatest playboy. In 1991, Bening, then 33, auditioned for Bugsy, the gangster biopic starring Beatty. He was 54, a seasoned director and star with a trail of broken hearts behind him. Their meeting was electric. Beatty reportedly called director Barry Levinson after her audition, declaring, "She's terrific. I love her. I'm going to marry her." Levinson thought he was joking, but Beatty was serious. They married in 1992, had 4 children, and built a stable family life that contrasted sharply with his past. Bening, a respected actress in her own right, brought a grounded strength to their partnership. Yet their story isn't without complexity. Beatty's eldest child, Stephen Ira, came out as transgender in 2006, and Beatty's public support calling Stephen a revolutionary and genius showed a softer side. But does this redemption arc erase the pain of his earlier years? Bening's role as the stabilizing force invites us to wonder, did she change Beatty? Or did he simply find someone who could match his intensity without breaking? Other women played significant roles, each illuminating a facet of Beatty's character. Julie Christie, his mid-1960s partner, was a fiercely independent actress who embraced an open relationship, a dynamic that suited Beatty's wandering eye. Their chemistry sizzled in McCabe and Mrs. Miller, 1971, and Shampoo, 1975. But off-screen, their bond frayed under the weight of his restlessness. Michelle Phillips, of the Mamas and the Papas, lived with Beatty in the early 1970s, believing his promises of marriage and children promises he never kept. It took her 2 years of therapy to see them as empty. Diane Keaton, fresh from her breakup with Woody Allen, collaborated with Beatty on Red's 1981. A professional triumph that won him an Oscar but strained their brief romance. And then there's Carrie Fisher, who, at 17, faced Beatty's unwanted advance during Shampoo's production in 1975. Her rejection was rare, a defiance that underscores the power dynamics at play. Each woman, from Collins to Fisher, navigated Beatty's charisma and emerged with stories of passion, betrayal, or resilience. Professionally, Beatty's allies were just as crucial. Stella Adler, his acting coach in the late 1950s, honed his raw talent, giving him the tools to captivate audiences. Elia Kazan, the director of Splendor in the Grass, pushed him to emotional extremes, cementing his reputation as a serious actor. Jack Warner, the legendary studio head, was skeptical of Bonnie and Clyde but relented after Beatty's dramatic persistence, literally kissing his shoes to seal the deal. François Truffaut, the French New Wave icon, inspired Beatty to take on Bonnie and Clyde, seeing in him the vision to redefine Hollywood. These men didn't just enable Beatty's career, they amplified his influence, giving him the platform to become a producer and director who could control his own narrative. Yet their faith in him often came with a blind spot for the personal chaos he wrought. Beatty's friendships with Dennis Hopper and Jack Nicholson, part of Hollywood's new guard in the 1960s and 1970s, reveal another layer. All three were linked to Michelle Phillips, a connection that hints at a shared culture of excess. Their camaraderie thrived in an era when Hollywood's rules were loosening, but it also normalized behaviors that, in hindsight, raise eyebrows. Beatty's ability to navigate this world charming directors, seducing co-stars, and outmaneuvering rivals speaks to a calculated intelligence. But it also begs the question, was he a master of relationships, or a manipulator who used them to his advantage? As we move deeper into his story, we'll probe the contradictions in his character, the unanswered questions that linger, and the cultural shifts that force us to see him anew. For every door his charm opened, someone else paid the price, and their stories demand to be heard. Warren Beatty's life reads like a Hollywood script, dramatic, glamorous, and full of twists. But beneath the surface of his rise to fame lies a web of unanswered questions and contradictions that challenge the polished image of the charming leading man. Was he a romantic idealist caught in the whirlwind of his own charisma, or a calculated operator who left chaos in his wake? As we dig deeper into his story, the gaps in the narrative, moments of mystery, inconsistencies, and moral ambiguities demand scrutiny. These unresolved threads not only fuel speculation, but also force us to confront the darker side of Beatty's legacy. Let's peel back the layers and ask, what truths remain hidden? And why do they still matter? One of the most perplexing mysteries in Beatty's story is his unexplained disappearance in 1963, during the height of his relationship with Natalie Wood. The couple had been living together in Wood's rented Bel Air mansion, hosting lavish parties and basking in the glow of Splendor in the Grass's success. But one night, while out with friends, Beatty simply vanished. For an entire week, he was getting no calls, no explanations. Wood, already fragile from the public scrutiny of their affair, was left in the dark. When he finally reappeared, offering no account of where he'd been, it was the breaking point. Wood ended the relationship, and Beatty moved on without a backward glance. Where did he go? Was it a reckless escape from the pressures of fame, a personal crisis, or something more calculated, like a dalliance he wanted to keep secret? Beatty, notoriously private, has never addressed it. and his silence only deepens the intrigue. This wasn't just a lover's spat. It was a moment that pushed Wood to her emotional edge, raising questions about his accountability. Could a man so attuned to his public image be so careless with those closest to him? Another lingering question revolves around Joan Collins' decision to terminate her pregnancy with Beatty's child in the early 1960s. Collins revealed this in her memoir decades later, framing it as a choice driven by fear of scandal, of derailing her career, of navigating motherhood in Hollywood's unforgiving spotlight. But why did she keep it secret for so long? Was it solely to protect her reputation? Or did Beatty's influence play a role? He was 23, ambitious, and already entangled with Natalie Wood when Collins faced this crossroads. Did he know about the pregnancy? If so, what was his response? Support, indifference, or pressure to prioritize their careers? Collins' account is sparse on these details, and Beatty has never commented. The silence is telling. In an era when women in Hollywood faced immense pressure to conform, Collins' choice reflects the personal sacrifices demanded of stars, particularly women. But it also casts Beatty in a harsh light, a man whose actions, intentional or not, left others to bear the consequences. Could his charm have masked a deeper irresponsibility, one that Collins carried alone for years? Beatty's draft avoidance in 1960 adds another layer of ambiguity. At 22, with the Vietnam War escalating, he joined the California Air National Guard, only to be dishonorably discharged a year later. The discharge made him ineligible for the draft, freeing him to pursue his acting career without interruption. On the surface, it seems like a clever maneuver, a young man outsmarting the system to chase his dreams. But the details are murky. Why the dishonorable discharge? Was it a deliberate act, like failing to meet obligations, or an administrative fluke? In the 1960s, draft dodging was a charged issue, with some viewing it as cowardice, others as defiance. Beatty's silence on the matter, coupled with his later outspokenness on political causes, like his advocacy for workers' rights during Reds, creates a contradiction. How do we reconcile a man who avoided military service with the one who lectured Spanish extras on labor rights in 1981, only to face irony when they walked off his set demanding fair wages? Was his draft strategy a youthful pragmatism, or a sign of a man who bent rules to suit his needs? Then there's the contradiction of Beatty's relationship with fame itself. He famously loathed the spotlight on his personal life, dodging interviews and bristling at questions about his past. Yet his action-shy profile affairs with stars like Wood, Julie Christie, and Madonna courted the very attention he claimed to despise. Tabloids thrived on his escapades, from his 1961 affair with Wood to his 1990 fling with Madonna during Dick Tracy. Each headline amplified his Playboy mystique, boosting his box office appeal. Did he truly hate the scrutiny? Or was it a calculated trade-off? His discomfort with publicity seems at odds with his knack for leveraging it. For instance, in 1967, he produced Bonnie and Clyde, a film that challenged Hollywood norms and cemented his visionary status. The project required him to charm studio head Jack Warner, even humbling himself to secure funding. This was a man who knew how to play the game publicly private, yet privately public. Could his aversion to fame have been a carefully crafted persona, one that let him control the narrative while reaping its rewards? Finally, there's the question of Beatty's moral compass in his romantic pursuits. His advance on 17-year-old Carrie Fisher during Shampoo's production in 1975 is particularly jarring. Fisher, a newcomer, rejected him, a rare defiance against a man few women said no to. But why did he pursue her, knowing the age gap and power imbalance? Was it a moment of reckless entitlement, or a pattern of behavior normalized in Hollywood's permissive culture? Similarly, His encounter with Marilyn Monroe in 1962, the night before her death, raises eyebrows. He described it as Soulful piano serenade. A moonlit walk, but the timing feels almost too cinematic. Was it a genuine connection? Or a story he shaped to burnish his legend? These moments, scattered across decades, paint a picture of a man whose charisma often outpaced his ethics. Yet his later life is stable marriage to Annette Bening. His support for his transgender son suggests a capacity for growth. Can we separate the artist from the man? Or do these contradictions define him? These unresolved questions: Beatty's disappearance, Colin's secret, his draft maneuver, his fame paradox, his moral lapses aren't just gossip fodder. They point to a deeper truth about power and accountability in Hollywood's golden age. Beatty thrived in a system that rewarded charisma and overlooked harm. But at what cost? As we move forward, we'll explore how the public and media grappled with his image, from adulation to scrutiny, and dive into the specific tragedies, like Natalie Wood's, that haunt his legacy. The contradictions in Beatty's story aren't just personal. They're a mirror to an industry that enabled men like him to flourish, often at the expense of others. What do these gaps tell us about the man? And what do they reveal about the world that made him a star? Warren Beatty's life played out like a blockbuster full of drama, romance, and larger-than-life moments that kept audiences captivated. But the way the public and media perceived him, from the swinging 1960s to the present day, tells a story of its own. In his heyday, Beatty was Hollywood's golden boy, a playboy whose charm and conquests were celebrated in gossip columns and fan magazines. Yet, as cultural tides have shifted, so too has the lens through which we view him. Today, in an era of accountability and Me Too, his scandals once glamorized face scrutiny that could redefine his legacy. How did the media shape Beatty's myth? And how might modern audiences, especially on platforms like X, react to his story? Let's explore the evolving narrative around Hollywood's most enigmatic star and ask, can a man's legend survive when the spotlight turns critical? In the 1960s and 1970s, Beatty was a media darling, his every move fodder for the tabloids. When he began dating Joan Collins in 1960, the press ate at UPA-dashing newcomer paired with a glamorous star. Their romance was painted as a fairy tale, with little mention of the strain Collins later described. By 1961, when Beatty's affair with Natalie Wood sparked headlines, the tone shifted to sensationalism. Gossip columns buzzed with tales of stolen kisses on the Splendor in the Grass set, framing Beatty as a heartthrob who could unravel even a married woman's resolve. The collapse of Wood's marriage to Robert Wagner and Beatty's engagement to Collins was catnip for the press. But the coverage rarely probed deeper. It was all part of the Playboy mystique, a man who lived fast, loved hard, and always landed on his feet. When Bonnie and Clyde hit theaters in 1967, cementing his status as a cinematic visionary, the media's adoration grew. His affairs with Julie Christie, Michelle Phillips, and later Madonna were chronicled with a wink, as if his romantic exploits were just another facet of his genius. The public lapped it up, seeing Beatty as a symbol of liberated masculinity in a changing Hollywood. This glorification wasn't accidental. It was rooted in the era's culture. The 1960s and 1970s were a time of sexual revolution and loosening social norms, particularly in Hollywood, where power and charisma often trumped accountability. Men like Beatty, alongside peers like Dennis Hopper and Jack Nicholson, thrived in a system that rewarded their excesses. The media rarely questioned the impact of his behavior on the women involved. Collins' struggles, Wood's emotional turmoil, or Phillips' broken dreams were sidelined in favor of his charisma. Even when Beatty made headlines for less savory moments, like his 1975 advance on 17-year-old Carrie Fisher during Shampoo. The press barely blinked. It was chalked up to his roguish charm, a footnote in the saga of a star who could do no wrong. Fans, too, were complicit, idolizing Beatty's on-screen rebels and off-screen romances as two sides of the same coin. To them, he was Clyde Barrow in the flesh, dangerous, desirable, untouchable. Fast forward to the 2020s, and the view of Beatty's legacy is far less rosy. The Me Too movement, which gained momentum in 2017, reshaped how we evaluate Hollywood's past, exposing the power imbalances that enabled men like Beatty to operate unchecked. If his story were to break on platforms like X today, the reaction would likely be polarized. On one hand, nostalgic fans, particularly those in Unraveled's 45 and up demographic, might defend him, arguing he was a product of his time. They'd point to his artistic triumphs, like producing Bonnie and Clyde at 29 or winning an Oscar for Reds in 1981, as evidence of a complex figure whose flaws shouldn't overshadow his contributions. They might cite his stable marriage to Annette Bening since 1992, or his support for his transgender son, Stephen, as proof of personal growth. Posts on X could read, "Beatty was a legend, not a predator. Hollywood was different then, everyone played the game." These defenders might argue that the women who dated him, like Collins or Christie, were consenting adults who knew the score. On the other hand, critics would likely dominate the conversation, armed with a modern understanding of consent and power dynamics. The revelation of Joan Collins' pregnancy termination, detailed in her memoir, could spark outrage, with ex-users dissecting the pressures she faced and Beatty's apparent absence from her decision. Hashtags like Warren Beatty scandals or Hollywood reckoning might trend, with threads detailing his pattern of overlapping relationships, Collins to Wood to Christie, and so on. Natalie Wood's story, particularly her 1967 suicide attempt after rejecting a role in Bonnie and Clyde, could fuel viral posts, with users questioning whether Beatty's pursuit pushed her to the brink. Comments might read, "He broke her heart and walked away. How many others suffered in silence?" The Carrie Fisher incident, where a 38-year-old Beatty made a pass at a 17-year-old, would likely ignite the fiercest debates. In today's climate, this could be seen as predatory, with ex-users comparing it to other Hollywood scandals. Memes might juxtapose Beatty's suave image with captions like, "Charm doesn't excuse crossing lines." The media's role in the shift can't be overstated. In the 1960s, outlets like Photoplay and Variety amplified Beatty's allure, rarely holding him accountable. Today, online publications and ex-influencers would likely take a sharper tone. Think pieces might explore how Hollywood's Boys Club enabled Beatty's behavior, drawing parallels to figures like Harvey Weinstein or Roman Polanski. Yet some outlets, wary of alienating older readers, might hedge, framing him as a flawed genius rather than a villain. This tension between condemnation and contextualization will shape the discourse, with X serving as a battleground for competing narratives. Supporters might post clips of Beatty's Reds acceptance speech, urging nuance, while critics could share quotes from Collins' memoir, demanding accountability. The lack of direct commentary from Beatty himself, who's remained elusive in interviews, would only fuel speculation, leaving room for both sides to project their views. What's clear is that Beatty's story resonates beyond his era. It taps into broader questions about power, privilege, and redemption in Hollywood. His ability to dodge the Vietnam draft, charm studio heads, and navigate scandals unscathed speaks to a system that favored men of his ilk. Yet the women in his orbit, Collins, Wood, Fisher, paid a price. Their stories often reduced to footnotes until recently, As we move deeper into this saga, we'll focus on specific tragedies, like Wood's, and moments, like Fisher's defiance, that challenged the myth of Beatty's charm. Was he a man shaped by a permissive culture, or did he exploit it to his advantage? The public's shifting gaze, from adulation to skepticism, suggests the answer lies in the shadows of his stardom, where the truth is rarely as simple as the headlines. Warren Beatty's life was a whirlwind of romance and ambition, but few stories in his orbit carry the weight of Natalie Wood's. Her relationship with Beatty, sparked on the set of Splendor in the Grass in 1961, was more than a scandalous affair. It was a turning point that left her shattered. Her life marked by heartbreak and a haunting tragedy. Wood, a former child star desperate to redefine herself, became entangled with a man whose charm masked a reckless disregard for the consequences of his actions. As we unravel this chapter, we're forced to confront uncomfortable questions. Was Beatty merely a passionate lover caught in the heat of the moment? Or did his pursuit of Wood exploit her vulnerability, pushing her toward a breaking point? Let's dive into the rise and fall of their relationship and the devastating aftermath that still echoes today. In 1961, Natalie Wood was at a crossroads. At 23, she'd been a Hollywood fixture since childhood, starring in classics like Miracle on 34th Street. But transitioning to adult roles was proving difficult, and her career teetered on the edge of irrelevance. When she was cast opposite Warren Beatty in Splendor in the Grass, a raw, romantic drama about forbidden love, it felt like her chance to shine. Beatty, 24, was a relative newcomer, fresh off a Tony nomination and hungry for stardom. Director Elia Kazan saw their potential, but he also saw the need for authenticity. He pushed them hard, demanding take after take of emotionally charged scenes, kisses, embraces, moments of anguish. On set, their chemistry was electric, but it didn't stay confined to the script. Wood was married to Robert Wagner, a union already strained by her insecurities. Beatty was engaged to Joan, a relationship fraying under his relentless energy. As Kazan urged them closer, the lines between performance and reality blurred, and soon, whispers of an affair began to spread. The affair wasn't just gossip, it was a detonation. By late 1961, Wood's marriage to Wagner was over, and Collins, betrayed by Beatty's infidelity, called off their engagement. The tabloids pounced, painting Beatty as a roguish heartthrob and Wood as a starlet swept away. But the reality was far messier. Wood, already battling anxiety and self-doubt, found herself in the eye of a media storm. Beatty, meanwhile, seemed to thrive, moving into Wood's rented Bel Air mansion and basking in the attention their romance drew. They hosted lavish parties, played house, and prepared for Splendor in the Grass's release. The film, a critical and commercial hit, validated their on-screen magic. But off-screen, their relationship was unraveling. Wood's fragility clashed with Beatty's intensity. He was a rising star, unburdened by the weight of a fading past. She was a woman fighting to reclaim her place in a ruthless industry. In 1963, the breaking point came. One night, while out with friends, Beatty disappeared without a word. For a week, he was gone, leaving Wood to grapple with confusion and betrayal. When he returned, offering no explanation, she'd had enough. She ended it, and he walked away, unscathed. The breakup wasn't the end of Wood's pine, it was the beginning of a deeper spiral. She threw herself into work, starring in West Side Story and other projects. But her confidence was shaken. The press tour for Splendor in the Grass had been grueling, with reporters fixating on her relationship with Beatty rather than her performance. She felt exposed, her personal life overshadowing her talent. By 1967, when Beatty approached her to star as Bonnie in Bonnie and Clyde, the wounds were still raw. He was producing the film, a bold gamble that would redefine his career, and he saw Wood as the perfect fit. But the idea of working with him again was too much. Wood broke down in tears, telling him she couldn't bear to be in any film, let alone one with him. That night, she attempted suicide, a desperate act that marked a low point in her life. She stepped away from acting for 3 years, retreating from the spotlight to rebuild her mental health. It was the last time she and Beatty spoke, a conversation that left her scarred and him seemingly unaffected. Wood's story doesn't end there, but her entanglement with Beatty casts a long shadow. She eventually returned to acting, remarried Wagner, and rebuilt her career. But her life was cut short in 1981 when she drowned under mysterious circumstances at 43. While Beatty wasn't directly connected to her death, his role in her earlier emotional turmoil raises questions about his impact. Wood was vulnerably a woman navigating a predatory industry, grappling with fame's pressures, and seeking validation in love and work. Beatty, with his magnetic charm and relentless ambition, swept into her life at a moment when she needed stability, not chaos. Did he recognize her fragility? Or was he too consumed by his own desires to care? The affair, though brief, had lasting consequences, contributing to a period of instability that Wood struggled to overcome. Her suicide attempt in 1967, triggered by the prospect of facing him again, is a stark reminder of the human cost of his actions. This tragedy forces us to look beyond the glamour of Beatty's Playboy image. In the 1960s, the media celebrated his conquests, framing Wood as just another name on his roster. But today, we see her story through a different lens, one shaped by empathy and an understanding of power dynamics. Wood wasn't just a starlet. She was a woman whose vulnerabilities were exploited, intentionally or not, by a man who thrived in Hollywood's permissive culture. Could Beatty have acted differently, offering support rather than disruption? Or was he a product of an era that normalized such behavior, where men like him faced no consequences? Wood's pain, and her resilience in the face of it, demands that we reconsider the narrative around Beatty. As we move forward, we'll examine another troubling moment, his advance on a teenage Carrie Fisher, and ask how these incidents fit into the broader pattern of his life. Natalie Wood's tragedy isn't just a footnote in Beatty's story. It's a call to question the myth of the untouchable leading man and the industry that enabled him. Warren Beatty's charm was a double-edged sword, cutting a path through Hollywood with equal parts allure and destruction. While his affairs with stars like Natalie Wood and Joan Collins fueled his legend, they also left a trail of emotional wreckage. But one incident stands out for its audacity and its resonance with today's conversations about power and consent: Beatty's advance on a 17-year-old Carrie Fisher during the production of Shampoo in 1975. Fisher, a newcomer to Hollywood, rebuffed him, becoming one of the few women to say no to the notorious Playboy. This moment, though brief, is a window into the broader dynamics of Beatty's world, a world where older, powerful men often pursued younger women with little consequence. As we unpack this episode, we're forced to ask, was Beatty's behavior a reflection of a permissive era, or a deliberate exploitation of his status? Let's dive into the Fisher incident and what it reveals about power, privilege, and accountability in Hollywood's golden age. In 1975, Carrie Fisher was a fresh-faced teenager, the daughter of Hollywood royalty Debbie Reynolds and Eddie Fisher, but still carving her own path. At 17, she landed a supporting role in Shampoo, a satirical comedy starring Beatty as a womanizing hairdresser. Beatty, then 38, was at the peak of his career, a producer, director, and star who could make or break projects with a single phone call. Shampoo was a personal triumph for him, not just for its critical success, but for its casting. He brought together his ex-girlfriend Julie Christie and his then-current girlfriend Michelle Phillips to play his characters' lovers, blurring the lines between art and life. Fisher's role was smaller, but her presence on set put her in Beatty's orbit, a place that, for many women, came with unspoken risks. According to Fisher, recounted years later in her memoirs, Beatty made a pass at her during production. The details are sparse. She didn't elaborate on the setting or specifics, but her response was clear. She rejected him. A bold act for a young actress facing a Hollywood titan. Fisher's defiance was rare, and it underscores the power imbalance at play. To understand the weight of this moment, we need to consider the context. Fisher was a teenager, new to the industry, and acutely aware of its hierarchies. Beatty, by contrast, was a seasoned power player, his charm a currency that opened doors and won hearts. His advance wasn't just a personal misstep. It was a reflection of a culture where such behavior was often shrugged off. In the 1970s, Hollywood was a playground for powerful men, where age gaps and workplace flirtations were normalized, even celebrated. Stars like Beatty, Jack Nicholson, and Dennis Hopper moved through this world with impunity, their indiscretions framed as part of their roguish appeal. Fisher's rejection, though, was a quiet rebellion, a refusal to play along with a script that cast her as another conquest. Her ability to say no likely bolstered by her sharp wit and insider knowledge as a Hollywood kid set her apart. But it also raises a troubling question. How many other young women, less equipped to resist, faced similar advances from Beatty or men like him? The Fisher incident resonates deeply in today's climate, where the Me Too movement has exposed the predatory underbelly of Hollywood's past. In 1975, Beatty's past might have been dismissed as a harmless flirtation, a story to laugh off over drinks. But viewed through a modern lens, it's a red flag. A 38-year-old man pursuing a 17-year-old co-star, leveraging his status in an industry where power imbalances were stark. Fisher was underage, a fact that amplifies the ethical breach. Even if the advance was subtly suggestive comment, an invitation, she was in a vulnerable position, dependent on Beatty's goodwill as a producer and star. Her rejection didn't derail her career. She went on to become Princess Leia, a cultural icon. But the incident left a mark, enough for her to recount it years later with her trademark candor. It's a reminder that not every woman in Beatty's path emerged unscathed. And it prompts us to wonder, were there others who didn't speak out, whose stories remain buried? This episode also fits into a broader pattern in Beatty's life. His romantic pursuits often targeted women, and his professional sphere co-stars like Natalie Wood, Julie Christie, and Madonna, or collaborators like Diane Keaton. Shampoo itself was a microcosm of this, with Beatty surrounding himself with past and present lovers, creating a dynamic where personal and professional lines blurred. His advance on Fisher wasn't an isolated lapse. It was part of a continuum, one that included overlapping affairs, broken promises, and emotional fallout. Joan Collins' pregnancy termination, Natalie Wood's suicide attempt, Michelle Phillips' years in therapy all point to a man whose charisma could destabilize those around him. Fisher's story, though less tragic, highlights a specific kind of entitlement, the belief that his charm entitled him to any woman, regardless of age or context. Was this behavior a product of Hollywood's anything-goes ethos, where powerful men faced no repercussions? Or was Beatty uniquely reckless, wielding his influence with a disregard for boundaries? The Fisher incident also invites us to compare Beatty's actions to broader Hollywood patterns. The 1970s were rife with similar stories. Older directors, producers, and actors pursuing much younger women, often under the guise of mentorship or romance. Roman Polanski's 1977 assault on a 13-year-old girl, for instance, shocked even the permissive era. Yet he continued to work. Hugh Hefner's Playboy Mansion, a hub for Hollywood's elite, normalized relationships with significant age gaps. Beatty's advance on Fisher, while less egregious, fits this mold, a moment that might have been excused as just how things were. But today, such excuses don't hold. On platforms like X, users might dissect this incident with hashtags like Hollywood power abuse, drawing parallels to other fallen icons. Critics could argue that Beatty's behavior, even if consensual in other cases, reflects a systemic issue, an industry that empowered men to act without accountability, leaving women to navigate the fallout. As we approach the end of Beatty's story, the Fisher incident serves as a pivot point, challenging the myth of the untouchable playboy. It's not just about one man's misstep. It's about a culture that enabled and celebrated men like him, often at the expense of those less powerful. Fisher's defiance, like Wood's resilience and Colin's candor, reminds us of the strength it took to navigate Beatty's world. But it also leaves us with a lingering question: how do we judge a man whose talent reshaped cinema, yet whose actions left scars? As we head toward our conclusion, we'll reflect on Beatty's legacy, his triumphs, his tragedies, and the lessons his story holds for us today. The line between charm and harm is thinner than we'd like to believe. And in Hollywood, it's a line that's too often crossed. Warren Beatty's life is a riddle wrapped in a Hollywood dream, a tale of dazzling triumphs and haunting shadows that refuses to resolve neatly. As we've traced his path from a small-town dreamer to a cinematic icon, we've uncovered a man whose charisma built empires and broke hearts with equal ease. His story marked by the pain of Joan Collins' hidden pregnancy, the tragedy of Natalie Wood's emotional collapse, and the audacity of his advance on a teenage Carrie Fisher forces us to confront a question as old as fame itself: when does the glow of genius blind us to the cost of its pursuit? This isn't just about one man. It's about an industry, a culture, and a society that shaped him and let him thrive. As we close this chapter, let's step back and ask, what does Beatty's legacy teach us about the stories we tell, the heroes we crown, and the truths we choose to ignore? Beatty's achievements are undeniable. He didn't just star in Bonnie and Clyde. At 29, he produced it, defying studio skepticism to redefine Hollywood storytelling. His Oscar for directing Reds in 1981 proved he was more than a pretty face. He was a visionary who could wrestle complex narratives into art. Yet these milestones came with a shadow. Colin's decision to terminate her pregnancy in the early 1960s, driven by fear of scandal, reveals the stark choices women faced in a world that celebrated men like Beatty while punishing their partners. Wood's 1967 suicide attempt, sparked by the prospect of facing him again, is a wound that still bleeds in our collective memory. Fisher's rejection of his advance in 1975, bold as it was, underscores a troubling reality. Beatty's charm often crossed lines, testing boundaries that a less powerful man might have respected. These women, along with Julie Christie, Michelle Phillips, and others, weren't just players in his saga. They were individuals whose lives were reshaped by his orbit, often at great personal cost. What makes Beatty's story so unsettling is its duality. He wasn't a cartoonish villain, twirling a mustache as he schemed. He was a product of his time, a man navigating a Hollywood where power and privilege were handed to charismatic men with few strings attached. The 1960s and 1970s, with their sexual revolution and loosening norms, created a playground for figures like Beatty, Jack Nicholson, and Dennis Hopper. Affairs were gossip, not scandals. Age gaps were quirks. not red flags. The media fed this myth, painting Beatty as a roguish heartthrob whose conquests only added to his allure. But this permissiveness had a price, paid by the women who loved him, worked with him, or simply crossed his path. Collins carried her secret for decades, would rebuild her career, but never fully escaped her demons. Fisher, with her razor-sharp wit, turned pain into art. But her story reminds us of the courage it took to say no. These weren't just personal dramas. They were symptoms of a system that valued male genius over human cost. Today, that system is under scrutiny. And Beatty's story feels like a time capsule from a world we're still trying to understand. If his scandals broke on X in 2025, the reaction would be seismic. Supporters might argue he was a man of his era, his flaws dwarfed by his contributions Bonnie and Clyde's cultural impact, Reds' political audacity, his stable marriage to Annette Bening since 1992. They point to his support for his transgender son, Stephen, as evidence of growth, a sign that the playboy matured into a man capable of empathy. But critics would counter with a fiercer narrative, one fueled by Me Too's legacy. The Fisher incident, with its stark age gap, could spark viral threats, with users calling out the entitlement of a 38-year-old pursuing a 17-year-old. Which tragedy might inspire hashtags like Justice for Natalie, demanding we re-examine the men who destabilized her. Collins' story could ignite debates about the hidden toll on women in Hollywood, where ambition often meant sacrifice. The discourse would be messy, polarized, but necessary, a reckoning with a past that's not as distant as we'd like. This reckoning isn't just about Beatty. It's about us. Why do we elevate figures like him, even when their flaws are laid bare? Hollywood has always been a factory of myths, crafting heroes from flawed men and sidelining the stories of those they hurt. Beatty's life is draft avoidance, his strategic charm, his ability to emerge from scandals unscathed reveals a truth about power. It bends reality to its will. But power doesn't erase accountability, and myths don't erase pain. As we grapple with his legacy, we're left with a choice. Do we cling to the comfort of nostalgia, celebrating the artist while ignoring the man? Or do we demand a fuller accounting, one that honors the voices of Collins, Wood, Fisher, and countless others who navigated his world? Their stories aren't just footnotes. They're a call to rewrite the narrative, to build a culture where talent doesn't excuse harm and where the powerful answer for their choices. So, where do we go from here? Beatty's story doesn't offer easy answers, but it does offer a mirror. It asks us to look at the heroes we've crowned, the systems we've upheld, and the silences we've accepted. It asks us to listen not just to the loudest voices, but to the quiet ones, the ones that carry the weight of truth. What will you take from this? Will you see Beatty as a flawed genius, a relic of a bygone era, or something else entirely? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Where do you draw the line between art and accountability? Thank you for joining us at Unraveled, where we dig into the stories that challenge us to think deeper. Subscribe now, hit that bell, and join our community to uncover the truths others overlook. Don't miss a single Revelations Day with Unraveled to shine a light on the shadows. Until next time, keep questioning, keep seeking, and we'll meet you in the next story.